it's a nice segue to what the Benedict XVI Institute does under the Archbishop's inspiration and very active involvement. And because we've seen the power of beauty, right? And the way the church has always used beauty to teach and to touch hearts. We live in an age, and I don't know if it's the Protestant influence, you know, I'm something of an egghead myself, so don't get me wrong. I really appreciate the intellect and scholarship and intellectual arguments, and I'm pretty good at them for an amateur. But I realized really only when I took over this as executive director at the Archbishop's request, which is about 3 years ago, how powerful beauty is, not just for other people, but for me. And we had an artist retreat last week where we read Pope Benedict's letter to artists. And every time I say that, they're like, oh yeah, John Paul's letter to artists. And I'm like, no, Pope Benedict wrote one on the 10th anniversary of St. John Paul's letter. And he, you know, Benedict is a great intellectual, a brilliant man, but he has the soul of an artist, as John Paul did. And he speaks about the importance of beauty as a way of knowing, the imagination as a way of knowing. And when you really experience the reality of Christ, which can sometimes be done by direct intervention of the Lord, but often it's mediated by the power, you know, in an incarnational church, the power of sacred beauty to transform and touch souls in a way. Truth, beauty, and goodness are the three faces of God, and they're all the three great doorways to God. But the Archbishop's insight is that in contemporary world, the path of the way of beauty, the path of beauty is the one that has been neglected by the church, used the least often by the church today, and which is strange because of our centuries and centuries and centuries of history and understanding that art is not a luxury item or a frill. It's an essential part of the human soul and of touching human souls and bringing them to God. I'm going to get to the Free the Mass project, but just briefly, first of all, I want to thank all of you. Almost everyone here is a donor and as well, or a very active supporter, but most of you are donors and you help keep us going. We've been a very small and very effective organization. I want to give you a report during the age of COVID. So in March 9th, I flew home to my home in Northern Virginia to hunker down. And I looked around. We were coming off a very great cash position because of the success of Frank Larocca's Mass of the Americas as a solemn pontifical high mass, as a Latin mass on November 19th at the Basilica of the National Shrine of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception in Washington, D.C. That church we managed with our crack digital marketing team and a lot of labor on the part of the Archbishop, who was willing to do as many interviews as I could get to him about it, thank him. We just packed that church, and the online view of this beautiful Mass, it went virtual on the Basilica Shrine website, 131,000 views, as well as whoever watched EWTN televised it. So we're in a good cash position for a small religious nonprofit or arts organization. But then I realized that in March, our donors were losing their wealth, and our big donors were losing their wealth, and our small donors were losing their jobs or feared losing their jobs, and that we were an event-based organization, and we probably wouldn't be able to hold events in the real world for, I assumed, a year. That was my time frame. So I cut costs. I just slashed costs. I put myself on half pay. I went to our key consultants like the amazing Kevin Kakbinski, who is our digital marketer and fundraiser. And I didn't tell them what to do. I just said, I've cut my pay in half. What can you do? And they all responded really well and with no, and so we managed to cut what I call our run rate from around $500,000 to around $250,000. And then in April, I looked up and said, okay, if we don't do anything for a year, nobody is going to keep this organization alive a year from now. So what do I do? And we just launched into Zoom, beginning with a simple idea of doing Compline during Easter time. And people really liked that. We transformed our Festival of Marian Hymns into a Song for Mom Fest, where anyone could come for free, but for $100 donation, you could dedicate a hymn to mom that would be sung live. Had to be solo, you can't sing together on Zoom. Somebody is playing some martial music in the background. You might mute yourself. Who's doing that? I hate to mute all. Okay, I'm gonna have to mute all, and I'll be back in a second for the rest. Okay. So we've done about 17 Zoom events, and it's been a real blessing. First of all, just on the fundraising side, which I always look at, our digital event markout turnout. Our basic model is we let anyone come for free. We've begun to ask for a $25 ticket in lieu of ticket donation if you can afford it. We tell people to come anyway if that's not reasonable for you. And we've had close to 6,000 people register for our events. And we've added hundreds of new small donors. And it's been very successful. But even more importantly to me in terms of mission, we've added an awful lot of new relationships, both with artists. On October 2nd, as I told you, we're connecting up with it. We've done a lot of co-sponsored events with other arts groups. And one of those ideas that we had, which I think is remarkably successful, so let me just pull it out briefly. Here with us is Alex Begin, who is the host of ExtraordinaryFaithTV.com, also shown on EWTN. And it's a show primarily about the Latin Mass, I would say, but also sacred beauty generally. And Alex, hat tip to you. I'm going to ask you to unmute. But I met Alex because of the Mass of the Americas. He came in November. And I learned more. We met afterwards, and I learned more about him. He's kind of an amazing guy. He was an undergraduate at Harvard, and he was converted by the Latin Mass. And he's a successful entrepreneur. And as he says, he has a lot of mileage, airline miles. And he has developed a personal apostolate over the last 20 years, where he will just fly anywhere. If there's one priest who wants to learn how to do the Latin Mass, he'll fly, and you got 2 days to set aside for the training. He will teach that, and at the end of the 2 days, the priest will be able to celebrate a Latin Mass. So I was thinking about that and thinking we're not a Latin Mass society, but of course we support the great and ancient beauty of the Latin Mass, and I wondered how we could do more. And Alex agreed. We did not publicize this, so you might not have heard about it. We decided to do it as a clergy day for priests, religious, and deacons and seminarians. And we didn't know how many people would respond, but it ended up with just our normal $200 digital marketing budget and whatever. We were able to attract about 55 people came. Usually about half of people who register actually show up. So there was even more who were interested. And Alex put together a really amazing presentation featuring 3 different priests who had recently in the last few years learned how to do the Latin Mass. And so they could talk as brothers, as peers, to priests in particular about what they got out of it. Several of them now have integrated a Latin Mass into their parish. They can talk about like what to do and what to not do if you would like to bring the Latin Mass to your parish. In particular, to sum it up, don't take away anyone else's Mass. Bring the Latin Mass where nobody else is doing anything, and that's the way to get started. And so I don't know, Alex. So after this, at the end of that, we said, okay, Alex will come in and fly in and train you if you'd like. he doesn't charge for this. He doesn't even charge expenses. He'll just do it for you. And we had, I think, at least 10, something like that, 8 to 10 priests are now trained in the Latin Mass because of that one event, which cost a total of $200. And the interesting thing, I think, Alex, you'd agree that what the digital event marketing added is out. So these were new, they were not already in your network, right? You're now networked into some new areas, including here in San Francisco, where the sisters, the Order of Cloistered Sisters wanted a Latin Mass, and they could not find anyone to do it. And so Father Gabriel Wonker volunteered to be trained. He's a very soft-spoken, I think he's Nigerian, the Archbishop would correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly African priest here now, and Father Mike Lillydahl. And there are some more people. Alex will be back in San Francisco offering it to more priests and to seminarians who are interested. So this is really on our mission of practical resources for a more beautiful liturgy, a real increase in capacity, that we take Alex's sacrificial willingness and skill and we combine it with the team that B16 has developed in digital marketing outreach. And we got something, right? Alex, I'll stop talking. Do you want to just say a few words?
That's well said. There's not much I can add to that. I just think since the Institute has a mission of bringing beauty back to the church, this is one very good way and, in my opinion, easy way to do that. I think one of the worst stereotypes I hear about the traditional Mass is that it's difficult to learn. It's not difficult to learn. We can do it in 2 days. We've proven it over and over again. We just did it, as you said, in San Francisco. And so any priest who can give us 2 days, I guarantee you he'll celebrate his first Mass at the end of that second day. And that tends to lead to more things. It tends to lead to beauty in the ordinary form, tends to lead to musical programs being developed, beautification of churches and sanctuaries. There's a waterfall effect to this. So why not do it if we can?
Archbishop, I know you were at that meeting and you spoke about how you've urged priests and deacons even to learn this for their own spiritual formation. You want to say a few words about this?
Thank you, and thank you, Alex. I very much like what you said about how it has an influence on the ordinary form, the Novus Ordo as we call it, which is the vast majority of Masses celebrated in our parishes. I really believe in Pope Benedict's vision of the two forms informing each other, mutually enriching each other. So it's not just a matter of learning a new set of rubrics. It goes back to what Amy did when she played the ancient Roman chant within that basilica. Everything is tied together. It's all of one fabric woven together. So bringing this ancient beauty, rediscovering it, we can also reappropriate it in new ways, in a sense, with continuity with the tradition. My observation is that the form of the Mass we have now is, because it's not so tightly scripted as the older form of the Mass is, it doesn't by itself form a seminarian or a priest into a kind of a deep liturgical sacramental mentality. And also the vernacular, it has something to do with that as well. Not too many priests can improvise in Latin, you know. So I think the reason I want my seminarians to learn this form of the Mass is that it is in of itself formative in a proper sort of liturgical mindset and a sacramental sensitivity. It deeply enforces and reinforces that sense of the sacredness of the Mass and the centrality of the Eucharist. So with that mindset, with that deep spirituality, they can inform their celebration of the Mass. I've told them that the point is not that you will actually celebrate this Mass after you get ordained if you want to, and there's a need. It helps if there's a need that we have priests available. But most important to me is that the way they celebrate the Mass as the current form of the Mass, that it be something truly holy that instills a sense of the sacred. And I think the kind of formative quality of learning the Mass and then learning the symbolism behind it, all those gestures, all those little rubrics, they all have a symbolic value. It's all the mystery of Christ, from his incarnation to his passion, death, and resurrection. Is all, the whole Mass is a narrative of that. And the rubrics, gestures, all have something to do with that. So they can discover this symbolic sense, which heightens our sacramental sensitivity. So my hope is that we can have a sort of a mutual enrichment. I'm actually in Philadelphia right now. I celebrated a traditional Mass this morning for the Catholic Medical Association for the White Mass, the Mass that for medical professionals. They requested that this year it be in a traditional form. So it was the low Mass. There was a schola that sang some parts, but it wasn't with all those great solemnities. But I noticed that the people knew the responses, and the congregation participated in the responses. That's an example of how the new influences the old with that congregational participation. So I really see a great value with this Pope Benedict's vision, the patron of our institute, of the mutual enrichment of the two forms to recover the sacred and continue the project of authentic liturgical renewal.
Thank you, Archbishop. Very briefly, because I want to leave time for discussing the movement to free the Mass and the Archbishop's emergence as a leader, not only here in San Francisco, but speaking for the 67 million Americans who now live under government rules that on their face treat worship more restrictively than similar secular activities. So a great personal spiritual problem and a great constitutional and legal problem. So you heard about, we launched the St. Junipero Serra project. Actually, the Archbishop launched it when he didn't know he was doing this, but when he went into Golden Gate Park to the base of the statue that the violent mob toppled and defaced. And in this classic Catholic way of his, he spoke a few words about the evil that was done here to explain what we do, how we respond. And he responded with a minor exorcism of the statue because the evil one, as he said, was present, and a beautifully produced video circulated widely. And this was the first, I think, stirring among Catholics. They're very desperate to have someone speak out and voice what they are experiencing. And the toppling and desecration of St. Junipero Serra and really other Catholic statues in this odd iconoclastic moment we were in over the summer, that was the first step. And the Archbishop, we said, and the Archbishop immediately agreed, they topple statues, what do? We build. And so we have begun launching a project, the St. Junipero Serra project. And when we ran into Amy, which is another gift of COVID, I don't know that we would have met. We met via Zoom, and I can't even remember how that happened, except it was with Mark Brumley, the CEO of Ignatius. And so you've already heard about the digitalizing the mission churches that St. Junipero founded. We have a budget of a little less than 130,000 for this. We have raised 70 of that, so we're getting started. And the money is not only for the physical creation. It's great to put things up on the internet, and then theoretically people have access, and we can embed educational materials, and the California bishops are in the middle of creating some new materials to promote St. Junipero Serra, kind of update the narrative around him in response to the current criticisms. And but in addition, we have money to actually conduct digital pilgrimages. And it's been suggested that we should be working with California schools, because in the 4th grade, I believe, curriculum, every California school child has to learn about the missions. And I think this would be a great opportunity, especially for those who aren't within an easy school trip of the missions. Although truthfully, my experience is that if you see something on the magic box, the television screen or the laptop screen, then you want to go see it more because you know what you're seeing. So I even think this could be used in combination. We also launched a new works fund for artists, and part of it is dedicated to new works honoring St. Junipero Serra. We have identified a San Francisco painter. She's extremely gifted. Her name is Bernadette Cartenson Cody. You may know she's a Star of the Sea parishioner. And she's worked primarily as a book illustrator, so she has a very strong narrative sense, but she has also been commissioned by the Dominicans to do some larger paintings. And the theme of this is St. Junipero Serra and the American Saints. So love to hear from you. Maybe email me if you got ideas for American Saints we should include. We are thinking probably 5 or 6 against a California backdrop. And the idea of the American Saints project really comes from James Matthew Wilson. And this is another example of the various interconnects and how these ideas and relationships are feeding each other and how we pay attention to them when we stumble on a great idea. And James Matthew Wilson, who is a young poet, professor, and intellectual, whom Dana Gioia told me is the future of Catholic letters in America, we invited him out for the first celebration of the Mass of the Americas. Hopefully he'd be inspired to write a poem. He was inspired to write a short song cycle of 7 poems, which is called The River of the Immaculate Conception. And when I talk about this, I usually pause to add, do you know what the River of the Immaculate Conception is? Because I didn't, and I've never yet found anyone who knows, but it's the Mississippi River. Because those Jesuit missionaries, when they were out there in the 17th century, consecrated it to Our Lady. And that is part of the mostly unknown and very seldom told Catholic founding of America, which we do not mean to replace or deny the significance of what was happening on the East Coast. But we want to connect the dots through art, and this is our first. We will set up the equivalent of a GoFundMe. We're looking at platforms to see if we can get small and middle class donors to contribute. We're looking for a matching grant because that's always very motivating to get this off the ground. Our new works, which again are not specifically funded, we are funding these out of general revenues, are primarily our composer in residence, Frank Larocca. Frank, if you're on, I didn't see you, so I would introduce you. But the Mass of the Americas, of course, is the great one. We would have this November have a second great Mass by Frank Larocca, a Requiem Mass for the homeless, but it's been postponed to 2021. Anyone who would like to be a patron of that process, we'd love to dedicate the Mass to a patron of the arts, or at least the composition. The Mass will be dedicated to remembering the homeless who died on the streets. And it's going to be beautiful. And there are many other music projects in the works, possibly in the spring. One of them I'm excited about is a Lenten prayer service where Frank Larocca has commissioned 3 new works of art by composers that he values, and then we'll pair them with the classic, Renaissance or Counter-Reformation of the same text. And the model for the music is really what we're trying to do, and what we started to do before COVID halted, is recreate the great Renaissance Counter-Reformation tradition of the church, where music is commissioned from the heart of the church, and it finds new audiences by going through the great cathedrals until several hundred years later it ends up in, the Lincoln Center. So that's the vision. The Mass of the Americas has been to San Francisco. It's international. It's been to Tijuana. It's been to Houston. It was scheduled for Dallas in August. That will happen next year, or as soon as it's possible in re-COVID. It went to Allentown, New Jersey. It was scheduled for Canada in Guelph Basilica. That was postponed because of COVID. And this is like recovering a model that the church knows works and that no one else is doing. I love Bishop Barron, and I think he's a great gift to the church, and he's so much bigger than we are. But there are two things he doesn't really do. He doesn't do liturgy, which means he doesn't do sacred music. And he also focuses almost actually entirely, as far as I've seen, on dead Catholic artists. And of course, we have such a great and glorious tradition that's understandable and wonderful. But we see our mission as connecting that old and long tradition to showing that it's not a dead tradition. It has new flowers and inspiring a new generation of artists. From a culture of craftsmanship, the geniuses come, right? You cannot call genius into being, but you can create a culture of craftsmanship in which more people are working, the artists are connected to each other spiritually and in other ways. And that's our vision moving forward. So you all have my email if you have any questions or concerns. When I send you the link to Amy's work, I'm going to send you a donate link. Some of you have already donated, please do not feel pressured, but we could use your support for this, our core work, as we have just jumped head feet into also taking on the Archbishop's Free the Mass project. I want to say in particular, Amy, I just told Amy this 2 days ago, and we haven't talked about it yet, but I really want Amy working. She's a part-time fellow. She has another full-time job by which she makes a living. I want her to be working full-time for the Benedict XVI Institute, primarily so we can promote her work entirely. I mean, there's so many things. Rich Vigilante, who's on, and he's a board member, just privately chatted with me saying, we have to get Amy branded with B16 in front of every Legatus chapter in America, because they would love this presentation. It's perfect for their meetings. And then Roseanne Sullivan was saying, we have to get her in front of Catholic school children. And that would be a big project in itself. There's so much we could do. You've seen her, some of you have seen her twice. She's amazing. So that would be something I'd be delighted to talk to you about, presuming Amy would agree to come and work for us full time. So that's in process. And now I'm going to switch. That's my pitch for what we do. We're small, we're thrifty, we're creative, we're really on mission, and we look for new ways to jump on ideas and relationships that serve that mission. And ultimately, we serve the Archbishop. I believe that this is a providential moment for the Church. I think that Archbishop Cordileone, by his courage, by his skill, and by his prudence in not jumping in early when it would have divided the Church, but waiting impatiently, internally, I'm sure, but patiently, publicly, to try to work with the city until it was clear that the city was just messing with religious believers, but really in particular Catholics. This is if you want to see the news coverage, I will put in the chat box a link to, we have up on the Benedict XVI website. It's just called In the News. It's not fancy, but I try to stick literally every news story about us, or now about the Archbishop and Free the Mass, up there. So I'm going to stick that up. It's an awful lot. Our role, and I want to say I'm going to turn it over to the Archbishop and get out of the way, but because you funded the Benedict XVI Institute and because we existed, when the Archbishop was ready to act, we were able to jump in wholeheartedly and help him figure out how to amplify his voice and make it heard. And in particular, we suggested that he launch a petition drive. When I checked before we began, we were just about 150 shy of 20,000 petition signatures. This is important to show that Catholics care about this issue, but it's also a permanent increase in our capacity to amplify his voice. So we have already used this list to ask people, for example, to call Mayor London Breed's office personally and let her know how many Catholics are unhappy with what's happening, that the doors to our churches are barred. The city actually issued a regulation that only one person at a time is allowed in San Francisco churches for private prayer. So never before seen. As I was driving down Webster Avenue last night, I snapped a photo of a little storefront, and it said chakra meditation, spiritual advice, tarot readings, and a big neon sign, open, right? The things that you can do in San Francisco, one thing you can't do right now is go to inside your church for Mass, or go inside for Eucharistic adoration or for private prayer if you believe the city. So let me turn it over to you, Archbishop, to say what you want to say about that.
Okay, thank you, Maggie. Yeah, you covered it. I'll just fill in some more details. But first of all, I want to thank everyone watching and all those others who have been supporting the Benedict XVI Institute. You mentioned about the Mass of the Americas and new compositions of sacred music. You pointed out something very insightful, Maggie, before that you didn't mention this time, because people may ask, there's so much facing the church. We're under so much attack. We have so many crises going on right now. What's going on internally within the church, with what's going on in society right now. And this would seem like something kind of marginal at this point, not the thing to be focusing on. But Maggie, as you pointed out before, the most beautiful music composed in the history of the church, Renaissance polyphony, was composed at a time when the church is going through some fierce storms with the beginning of Protestantism and the breakup of the whole Christian world. This was a tremendous storm the church was trying to sail through. And that's gave birth to some of the greatest, most beautiful music the church has ever produced. So this is precisely the time to do that. Again, we evangelize through beauty. We use truth, beauty, and goodness. But there's something very intuitive about beauty that you just can't argue about it. So this is precisely what we need to be doing now. So thank you for your support for that. Thank you so much for your support for the Free the Mass movement.